Welcome back to the Rollup High Roller community. As always, nothing on the Rollup is to be construed as financial advice. We are just some educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this, and finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you, and let's jump in.
Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the DeFi by Design podcast. The Modular Thursday today. Feeling very modular and vibey today. I've been on the pod since 8 a.m. and woke up this morning and talked about my story in the crypto, and I always tell the same story with Rob about how we started the club and then we got wrecked on BitMEX. So feeling unwrecked today, Rob.
And you got wrecked on BitMEX. I got wrecked on Bittrex. We took very, very two different journeys to get to the same place. And yes, we've arrived here on this Modular Thursday. The vibes are feeling very modular, indeed. I feel like that's a particularly nice design choice for vibes nowadays. So, very, very special guest today is Dino from Fluent. Fluent is building a consortment of things in the space. We're going to be talking about some of the novel design choices that Fluent has made in their VM and their layer 2. And I think a good way to kind of like kick off this conversation is to like kind of like tell the story of Fluent. Like, you guys have been around for quite a while, thinking and building. What are some of the patterns and the trajectory that you've noticed Ethereum going, and where did you start to have ideas as far as where you could fit in, where Fluent could fit in, and sort of take ownership of one or more of these patterns?
Yep. So first off, good to be here, guys. It is indeed a very modular Thursday. As you know, it's actually getting me even more excited, which should be a very modular March coming up in a couple of months. But quick teaser. So yeah, happy to give like a overview of kind of what we're doing myself, I guess, and what we're doing on Fluent, if that would be helpful. So like you said, Dino, one of the co-founders of Fluent Labs, where and we were building a layer 2 blockchain on Ethereum, and I guess the best place to start, I guess, is where the inception of this thing, if that would be a useful beginning. I had spent a number of years in Web 2 in cloud infrastructure specifically. So I've worked on stuff kind of all over the place, always in early stage startups, always in kind of like developer tooling and infra. So I've done some stuff with like Kubernetes based ecosystems. I've done some stuff in edge computing, some like AI inference stuff, and like some data science tooling. And then I got interested in crypto. Well, I was interested in crypto before this, but probably started getting involved in crypto maybe like 3 or so years ago, and started just dabbling as like investing in some stuff, like, you know how it goes. And then started being like somewhat of like a hobbyist, like researcher, writer, just started like, started a blog and just started interacting on like crypto Twitter and discourse. And I got sucked right down like the Rollup and modular rabbit holes. Like I remember kind of like mid 2021 starting to see the like Polina pieces and like starting to see the Celestia start talking about modular, and like I was just hooked. I mean, it came from like the microservices background, right? So it just like made sense to me. And then so went down that rabbit hole. At the beginning of the past year, 2023, I was like, all right, I need to do something in this space. Like I need to build something. And the first thing I did, just because I had kind of like the built up knowledge base and kind of network in the modular ecosystems, I started Modular Media, which is news, research, education for like the modular infra space. And then maybe like 4 or 5 months later, I was actually introduced by a friend to what is now my co-founder and CTO, but he was like, hey, he's another researcher in the space at Scroll, and he's like, hey, these guys are working on like a zkWasm Rollup, like this would be pretty cool. You should probably talk to them. And I actually went out to Zuzalu, like the experiment in Montenegro, for a couple of weeks, and me and Dimitri, my co-founder, we just hung out. I mean, talk about like the perfect place to just like workshop an idea around and kind of like learn about it. You got like 200 like researchers and like devs there, and then you're just kind of asking them like, hey, like is this interesting, and kind of pressing into it. Also, we obviously had the time to get to know each other, and so that was kind of the inception. I can't, I would definitely say like kind of he was thinking about these things for specifically Wasm for longer than I was, but coming from the Web2 background, I'm like, this just makes sense. I mean, Wasm has started to dominate as like a runtime and like very desirable kind of compilation target in Web2, and like all developers like know this thing. It has a brand of its own, and all the tooling and libraries and packages that are compatible from Web2 can just kind of be ported into Web3, and that just made a lot of sense to me. I'm happy to kind of like offer a little bit more context on like the Wasm piece of it, and like maybe how, what does that mean? Like, how did it solve problems in Web2? Like, why was it popular there? And like, why does it make, and how does it exactly get applied in Web3? If that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think people may or may not understand the intricacies. I think people probably understand that Solidity and the programming language of EVM has difficulties and some downfalls. So we'd be keen to understand, what Wasm is, why it's important, why you guys chose this design choice, and then even further, like what zkWasm really enables.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it'd be helpful to kick it off with, just put what is WebAssembly, and kind of like, what, and kind of put it in context that way. So, you mentioned, and there's a lot of parallels. This is the interesting thing. There's a lot of parallels between what happened over the last 10, 20 years in Web 2 and what's happening right now in Web 3. So what happened in Web 2 is like you had cut the consumer internet and the consumer web kind of come online, started off as static web pages. And then there was this introduction of JavaScript, which is just like this amazing, like an amazing tool that like, enabled more kind of dynamic and interacted web pages, to the point where we now have, and it took off obviously. So now we have like full blown like applications that are possible in the browser. But then, like anything else, developers want to do more. They're always pushing the boundaries of what's possible. They want to build kind of like more performant things, more flexible things, just more novel things. And so now, over the past like 5 or so years, like devs started rubbing up into the limitations of the browser and JavaScript, the Freudian slip. But what happened is like WebAssembly, which is like kind of think of it kind of like a VM type thing. It's like an execution, like a runtime that a bunch of different languages can compile down to. So basically, if you splice in this WebAssembly thing into the browser, you're not limited to just JavaScript, but you can also kind of port over your Rust code or your C++ code or things like that. And the reason this is powerful is because there are reasons you might want to use those other languages. And so, whether it's for pure performance and efficiency, like, people will use C or C++ for like very low level system things because it's like highly performant. It requires a different skill set, but all these things make trade-offs. And so, you might want to use C for something. You might want to use Rust for something else. Maybe you just like it. Maybe you just like the syntax. There's a lot of people who are just like big fans of programming in some type of specific way. Maybe it's because there's some type of functionality that you're trying to accomplish that isn't as easy to do with the other one. They're trade-offs. So what happened was, when kind of WebAssembly came to be and it was spliced into this browser context, it really opened the design space for what developers can build. And just one easy example that it's used all over the place. We actually wrote an article on this. I can maybe drop in the show notes or something. But one very interesting example is Figma. So everyone knows Figma, like, disrupted the design space, now $20 billion company, disrupted Adobe, etc. What they did that was really novel that kind of enabled this disruption was actually based on WebAssembly. Now, they had, if you think about Figma, right, it's like what they did from a user standpoint is enable kind of an interactive, like collaborative design tool in the browser that was never really possible in the browser. These things were always done on desktop because that's where you were able to get the flexibility and performance. And in doing it, kind of fragmented the interactions. Like it wasn't able to be a real time kind of interactive tool with your teammates, right? You design something in a little isolated bubble and you would maybe email it to somebody or whatever. So they enabled this fundamentally new experience by combining like Java, TypeScript, actually, Rust, and C++ for different pieces of that application in the browser that enable different things, completely unlock the design space. And lo and behold, $20 billion company. So that's just like one example of like the power of kind of enabling developers to just do more in like unlocking things on certain platforms. And I think the same thing is happening with Web3. So it kind of parallels it, right? Like you had Ethereum, got really popular. This Solidity thing and EVM was easy enough to use. It like took off like a rocket. People really want to build for this Ethereum destination. But the actual like execution environment that's being used, the EVM and Solidity, also do have their limitations, and we're starting to rub up on those. And that's why, in our view, when you kind of bring this kind of tried and true WebAssembly like execution, which solved this exact problem or very similar problem in Web 2, and kind of put it onto Web 3 for developers to interact with, I think you'll get kind of similar results. And so that ties into the zkWasm part. The ZK part clearly comes in because we are building a ZK rollup. Technically, technically a Validium. Ultimately, I think we will shift into being a true rollup. Right now, we will use like alternative DA to enable higher throughput applications, but nonetheless, the ZK part helps us kind of like, put it on Ethereum, if you will. And then the WASM part enables kind of smart contracts and beyond, actually, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but it enables these general purpose languages and libraries and tools to be used effectively on Ethereum. So yeah, that's kind of how we see things, and we think that we're about to unlock like a very, very like big part of the design space.
Before we get into kind of the choices and trade-offs of Validiums and Rollups and alternative DA and Ethereum DA, got kind of like I'm coming to realize that as you describe WebAssembly and as it applies to Web3 execution environments, it sounds like WebAssembly is like this like execution environment aggregator, or like this VM aggregator, because it allows you to splice together these different pieces of code and then kind of like has this runtime that is composed of like multiple different programming languages with different syntax. And by combining them together, you're able to unlock new applications and possibilities. Is that like a fair like mental model to think about WASM?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I wouldn't look at it and say that it's a bunch of different like VMs coming together. Picture it as like one VM that it's like a substrate for all these different languages and these general purpose languages. And when you bring along the general purpose languages, what happens? You get to bring along the general purpose like tools and frameworks and libraries that people have built up over the past 5 to 10 years. Like every one of these languages that have been just used in daily in everyday development in Web 2 have some hundreds or thousands of like packages and libraries that each individually have network effects to them that give developers like an easier time building things, because it's just, how it works. It's just a bunch of tools, more tools in the toolkit. And so, yeah, I do think of it as like a VM that lets you kind of like bring in all those toolkits from all those different languages. And yeah, I think what you said was a good way of looking at it.
So I got asked this morning on the Blockchains podcast what I think about alternative VMs, and without digging into the details about the technology too much, the main thing that I said was that the onboarding of developer potential is absolutely so bullish, and regardless of which one wins or who succeeds and all these other different components, this idea of finally some sort of technology capable of onboarding tons of non-crypto native developers is like basically here and ready to be played with. And I feel like you guys take it even to the next level because devs can basically build contracts in a variety of different languages, which can also still interact with each other at the core level in the code base. So yeah, would love to kind of dive into that a bit more as well. Like, so if I'm a Rust dev, Rust TypeScript dev, we can both contribute to the same project or same idea, same application using different languages and still have it function all on one code base. How did that kind of work? Like, how does the differentiation of languages work? And is that kind of, am I thinking about that in the right way as well?
You are, and I'll set set the foundation, and then we can go into like a specific example to make it clear. Because you're exactly right, and it let's see. So the way if you're a Rust developer, you might come in kind of like two different flavors. I mean, you could be somebody who's a Rust developer who's already kind of familiar with blockchain things, and then like you know how to program in like smart contracts. You're familiar with, maybe you've built on Solana, or maybe you've built on Ethereum L1 or something like that. And that's where we're making it easy for that person, because they can, as part of our kind of like smart contract environment on the L2, they can basically write those Rust smart contracts the same way you described. And everything on that part of the platform is EVM compatible. So that means we're not trying to reinvent like our own standards for Rust smart contracts or for TypeScript smart contracts. We're basically saying, okay, Solidity, the way so many people already in crypto know how to program in Solidity and for EVM things. So let's just make it as compatible and like close to that developer experience as possible, yet let somebody program in Rust or some of these other languages. So we're trying, I think it kind of hits a nice sweet spot for people who are already kind of like Web3 native. Because it's like, hey, we're following like the standards of kind of like EVM and Solidity and stuff, but letting you kind of bring your own tools and kind of fit into that framework. And devs seem to really like that so far in our experience. On the other side, if you're a Web 2, and I'll come full circle to the question about like these things the different languages interacting with each other. But if you're a Web 2 native, and maybe you come and you say, oh, I don't know smart contracts right now at all. Or maybe you do, but like the use case that you want to build is not best suited for smart contracts. Like maybe the use case that you want to build is really just needs like verifiable computation of just like regular code. You can do that. Like that person can just come and not even have to worry about the smart contract part at all. They just kind of write their logic in Rust, in whatever language, and it gets kind of, the computation gets like proven and is verifiable under the hood. So like there's a few different ways. You kind of had me put, sit in the seat of a Rust developer. Like there's a couple different ways to look at it depending on the use case. But now, okay, let's just say you want to build Andy wants to build a smart contract in Rust, and Robbie wants to build a smart contract in like a TypeScript or Solidity or something. Like what does that look like? Let's root it in an example. So we've been talking to a number of like on-chain gaming and like autonomous world builders. And what seems to be interesting in that world is, maybe one developer who is building kind of like the baseline logic for like a game or a world or something, right? Like a digital physics, or like maybe a more simple like modding use case where like you have like a Super Mario or something like that kind of game, and somebody wants to build kind of the baseline of that game, or just the core components of it in one language, maybe in Rust. And then they want some parts of the game, at any layer of abstraction. It could be like down to some like digital physics, or it can be kind of just like most of the game, and let people kind of interchange the weapons or the way that somebody jumps up in the air or whatever, or the background. That can be composed together in a different language. So Robbie can come along and be like, he could be anybody in the world, anywhere in the world, and come along and just be like, okay, well, I know TypeScript, and I want to like extend that game or kind of like tailor that thing in TypeScript. You can just come along and do it. And, you can obviously do that if both of you are writing code in the same language as well, but it's just a matter of like broadening the market of people who have access to build on that foundation that Andy set.
Yeah, that's why I'm so bullish on all of this, dude. I think it's like you widen the scope of depth you can build on crypto rails, and that's just like, I mean, that is the end game here. Like there's no other way to get to the vision of like the strongest and loudest OGs with their ideas and you know the core ethos of crypto, you know, without kind of having this functionality. And even taking the dating example a bit further, you've been kind of pushing on these alternative capabilities, whether you call them L3s or you know, various different functionalities, which you know, these developer tooling capabilities can enable. I'd like to kind of explore that a bit as well, kind of thinking outside the box on what you're seeing as like some interesting use cases or design choices for like how this core principle of you know, multiple languages, onboarding, you know, devs, and building in this WebAssembly environment can then kind of enable.
Yeah. No, this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because like, it'd probably be helpful for me to set the stage with like the two main different ways that you can build on Fluent. So if you picture Fluent as this layer 2 blockchain, we support two different, I'll say like categories of applications. The first category is what we call shared apps. This is like what we were just describing before, for the most part, just like smart contracts. It's a smart contract platform, very simple. And you know, the EVM compatibility and all the stuff that we just mentioned before, but it's smart contracts. And then, you know, what we also have is the ability to deploy what we're calling shared sovereign apps, which the design space for this is where it gets pretty crazy, because in its simplest, or in its simplest form, I guess, or it's like most near-term form for us, it will be what you could call L2s or like app-specific rollups, right? Because like we have our code base, we still have our chain, and like we're building this framework alongside it, and you can kind of like, you know, deploy and customize your own like app-specific chains, L3s, whatever. But it doesn't stop there, and this is where it gets cool. It could be basically any type of isolated, like custom, I don't want to say isolated, but like standalone custom state machine that you can build using Fluent Base, which is our framework. Like I said, that could be an app specific rollup. That could be like literally a chain of blocks that has some type of computation on top of it. But it doesn't have to stop there. It can be just, it could be like web front ends. It can be, you know, we can eventually get to the point where that sovereign app is like your browser that's getting ZK proven under the hood. So you could have kind of like, you know, browser-based games that pop up, and like ZK state channels, and like all this kind of stuff is possible. Like, I don't know if you want to call it L3s, because it depends how you define kind of like the L2, L3 thing, but we'll go with sovereign apps because they have control over that state machine in whatever way they want. But essentially, you can get the computational integrity of Ethereum in just like this crazy design space of like whatever you want to deploy. You could deploy, you can build like databases and new types of databases, or typical like cloud developer infrastructure. You can do kind of like verifiable AI inference. Like there's just like all types of stuff that you can do there. And I think that's where things get really, really interesting. That said, I mean, a lot of that is best suited for like application specific use cases. Like if you want to deploy some like DeFi thing, like maybe you still want to have it in like a shared environment, and then you might deploy it as a shared app on Fluent L2. But you kind of see where it's going there. I mean, that's I don't think we're throwing around different names for these things, like kind of like shared apps and sovereign apps, and I feel like it kind of gets the point across. But yeah, hopefully that paints a little bit of a picture.
Yeah, I mean, L3s have been getting some hate. People have been like, bro, we don't need L3s. We hardly have L2s that are like decentralized and functional. So yeah, maybe we fade L3s for a little bit longer. But also, like, I mean, that is kind of what they are. If you're rolling up and settling to the L2, I mean, I guess you're just a sovereign app on the L2. But
yeah, I mean,
onchain that's settling to the L2.
Well, it depends, right? The reason, like in our like nomenclature there, like a sovereign app could be like an L3 chain itself, but like, if you have a like a web front end, if it's just like a website that's getting like ZK proven, do I want to call that like do I want to conflate that with like an app specific rollup or L3 or chain? Like it's not a chain, like, so I don't know. It's we can have open discourse on like what these things are called, honestly, but we didn't want to pigeonhole into like the L3 term because a lot of people don't seem to like it.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's funny, like the concept like of a chain and an app like they get like so hazy because like both of these originate from like a ledger, right? And you can even point at like something that is pretty definitively like an application like Aave. Like Aave has like its own ledger of like account balances on Aave, but like no one really considers it its own chain.
Yeah. Yeah, the lines definitely start to blur. Like the more like things get modular and kind of intertwined, and the more you're taking like a little piece of this over here, and I think we're always gonna have these like crypto Twitter battles about like what's technically what, but I think the good thing is that the separation of concerns and specialization that's happening with this whole modular movement just ends up like increasing like the rate of innovation and in like a really crazy way. And so, yeah, we'll have the never ending hurdle of finding a decentralized way to like come to consensus on the terminology. But it's, I think at the end of the day, if you're putting more kind of verifiable computation and like keys in people's hands and like, permissionless assets and logic, I think we're in a good place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Hence the value in providing people with a WASM module, like Fluent is doing. Cool, man. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about like why you chose, like, first of all, what is a Validium? Why it's maybe a little bit different than a rollup, and then why you chose to go the Validium path. And maybe DA is part of that. Maybe we'll talk about that afterwards.
Yeah, no, DA is definitely part of that. Is it helpful to distinguish between the different types of designs, or do you want me to just dive into like why we chose Validium?
Yeah, probably high level, like differentiation is going to help.
Okay. Yeah. So there's diving deeper into the terminology part of it without getting like clinging on to the debates of the day. I think some of the things that are pretty non-controversial are the difference between a rollup, a Validium, a volition, and an optimium. Jesus. So rollup, obviously, your listeners, I'm sure, have enough like modular context for this. A true rollup will put kind of like they'll settle and post the input or output data to one chain. Let's just use Ethereum as an example. That's like, what is the settlements, like kind of posting the proofs to be verified, like that layer tracks like the state roots and kind of like has an eye on like the state changes, and it updates the state roots with based on the proof verification. And then the DA part of it is like posting either the full transaction data or like the state differences, like how one, the record of like what changed from one state to the other. So that's a full rollup if you're doing all that on Ethereum. And then a Validium is if you take the input or output data and put it somewhere else. So maybe that's on Celestia, or EigenDA. And a volition is a hybrid, where you give like an app developer or user the decision whether they want this app on your chain to put data over here or over there. So it kind of maintains this like dual state thing where, some of the apps and some of the transactions on the chain have higher security, full rollup security, and some of them have Validium security, slightly less security. It's extra work, it's extra logic to kind of like maintain that as like the chain itself, but that's a volition. And then an optimium is just like a Validium, but with optimistic rollups instead of ZK, or sorry, with fraud proofs instead of ZK proofs. Very simple. We chose a Validium, at least for the time being. We will probably roll that out. Okay, let me go into why we chose Validium. So we chose Validium because I think it is really important that we maintain kind of the safety assumptions of Ethereum, or stay as close as possible to that. And yet we see a big opportunity to serve like higher throughput use cases, like gaming, social-fi stuff. There's a lot of gaming projects that are very interested in what we're doing, and like they typically end up needing like a higher throughput execution. And so I think EigenDA obviously hasn't shipped the mainnet yet, but that is our plan to deploy there, just because the specs look really, really promising to be able to support these use cases.
So any rollup that's not posting to Ethereum for their data is stuff considered a Validium, no longer a rollup?
Any
Is that the key differentiator?
that's not posting the transaction data or the input data? Yeah,
Right.
that's either a Validium. Well, actually, that could fall into the category of like a Validium, Volition, or Optimium, honestly, because
Right. So, but it's not a rollup.
it's not a rollup. Yeah, exactly.
On that like x-axis and y-axis in terms of like, I think it's like gas costs and like decentralization. It's like rollups are like the highest in terms of highest costs and highest levels of decentralization.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could, I guess, get a little bit trickier because there's the other variables of what type of data that you're posting in the DA layer.
Right.
Like if you're posting the full transaction data, it's going to be more expensive than if you're just posting the state diff, but you get even like better kind of like a trust model if you're posting the full transaction data. So it's like what ends up being more expensive if a rollup is posting transaction data on Ethereum versus like a Validium is posting, a rollup is posting state diffs on Ethereum, cheaper, but then a Validium is posting full transaction data on somewhere.
Right.
Some
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not.
So,
It's not.
no, so just tapping it.
Yeah, but typically, it's exactly what you said.
Yeah, and it must come down from the builder's perspective, especially with now the advent of kind of like DA solutions. If you look at my timeline, it's like Celestia integrated with somebody new every other day. I mean, it's like, well, if you can't compete with other rollups which are integrated with DA, well then, I mean, you got yourself a problem there. So, do you think that alternative DA is kind of could be a bit of an issue for decentralization, or is it like from a builder's perspective, it's a trade-off worth kind of taking in?
I definitely think it's a trade-off worth taking in. I think that the types of first off, if you can tell from the kind of beginning of the conversation, like my mindset is absolutely that developers will just keep on pushing the boundaries of what's possible. I mean, we saw that with the internet, right? Like with internet bandwidth, like every time, like we would constantly just push the boundaries of what's possible and like have to roll out like more and more and more infrastructure, and people will just flood the thing. And so as soon as I think when some of this other stuff comes to fruition and you have like millions of developers trying to like build on chain in a very like accessible way, and kind of we break through with some key applications that changes like the broader sentiment around it, and blockchains become like an exciting place for people to build. I think that people will just keep pushing the damn boundaries of like what's possible. So I do think that there's like a whole kind of design space and like a very big design space for even just the DA component, and like Celestia will get filled up, EigenDA will get filled up, Avail will get filled up. And like, I really think that if we break through, if things, yeah, it's bullish. You like this, right, Andy?
So wild.
I know. Yeah, we are. And so I kind of think of it that way. So was it worth people considering those trade-offs? Like, yeah, absolutely. Especially because with DA, right? Like we're pretty good at solving for like scaling data. Like we're pretty good at it in general, even before blockchains. Like it's just like we know how to solve that problem like pretty well. So I think it's all worthwhile, and it's worth me mentioning that I forgot to say before, the sovereign apps that I described that are built using our framework called Fluent Base, that'll be really, really modular as well. Like we'll end up integrating with like the Celestias and Avails and Near, and we want to make it so any sovereign app that gets built can decide, and that's the point, sovereign. Like you could decide like to post, you could use, whatever for sequencing, for DA, even settlement, and like messaging and interop, all that kind of stuff. So we definitely.
You guys will how to do own like Raft in a sense. So maybe not gonna like try to address that market necessarily, but like if builders want to come build apps on Fluent, you have a system where they can go from A to B all internally with the necessary tech and infra.
Well, so partially. So you can think of it more like an OP stack kind of thing than like a Caldera or a Conduit. Like we would be working with the RAS providers to deploy like sovereign apps like as part of their platform basically, and under the hood be using kind of like Fluent Base, which is our framework that will then aggregate, that where Fluent L2 would then aggregate all the proofs and kind of serve as the layer underneath.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I was going to go in a similar direction. And then like, once again, we think about like, well, what's the difference between an application and a rollup? If it's just like a framework to deploy those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there. Maybe you have an answer to that. I was gonna further ask about what that like what's your like end game is, or the vision. Is it like Fluent has dozens and dozens of different apps that are launched using Fluent Base with all RAS, using like shared sequencing, different DAs, trying to all come together, like bring like kind of what's the vision here?
All of it, man. Like, I think that we would love to get to a point where it's so easy for any even like Web2 native dev to just like come along and maybe the application experience that they want to build is let's say it's a game. Let's go with that. And let's just say that like some smaller portion of the experience they want to build is kind of like more financial in nature, and maybe they want to do that in Solidity. So they might learn a little bit of like the blockchain kind of like specific stuff. And then maybe they deploy that as a shared app, like a smart contract on Fluent L2. And then maybe like the broader part of their experience is not really like financial in nature. It's just like the logic of their game or whatever. And they want to build that in like a high performance, like Rust environment, using like as close to just like Rust code as possible and all like the libraries that they know, frictionless. And like, I would love it if like that latter part of the experience, was just like a couple clicks away, frictionless to build as we were just describing, but also frictionless to deploy. They would just click a couple buttons on like, Caldera or something like that, or, whatever. Maybe like AWS has kind of like a RAS offering where it's like, kind of the way that you just like click a couple buttons to deploy some code in like in AWS Lambda, which is just like a common developer thing that people do. Write your code, very easy, throw it over the wall. AWS takes care of it. I would love for that to kind of be the experience on Fluent, working together with some of the RAS providers.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I it's starting to come together for like how Fluent integrates with the rest of the modular landscape to ultimately provide this like throw over the wall type of experience to the end developer.
Yeah, exactly. And under the hood, like that could be going, there can be like a big kind of mesh between like Fluent and a lot of these other ecosystems, right? I mean, like under using Fluent Base, if we have 1,000 or several thousand sovereign apps, like maybe some of them are Rollups themselves, or sorry, some of them are, let's say, Validiums themselves and posting the data on any of the all DA providers that we talked about today. Maybe some of them are just like websites that people deploy that are getting like zk proven under the covers. So right now, all the web front end that we're using, even for our crypto apps, even for our dApps, are like hosted on a centralized place. Like that could all be decentralized. There's just a ton of stuff there. And I just think that each one of these different use cases will probably incorporate different parts of the modular stack, like across the board.
Yeah. I think it's going to sound corny, but it's like your job is like an altruistic one for the whole sake of crypto, wherein like Luke and Nets is going out and launching this toy business and this pudgy world to onboard as many basically normal people into owning up an NFT and having a blockchain wall without kind of even really understanding what's happening. They're really like you and kind of some of the other builders in this L2 alt VM kind of developer experience, non-crypto native devs world. Is like the main job is to just onboard as many of them as possible, get them to build with Fluent Base, hope that you can help them build something super valuable, whether it be consumer facing infra, etc. Maybe get a couple hits and further change the landscape for developing. I mean, that's like the most bullish thing about I mean, you might have a different opinion, but my opinion is like the most bullish thing about this like alternative VM, and also Rollup and non-Solidity programming language smart contracts. Like, we can bring on so many people, so many developers, and also non-developers, people who think and understand those languages. It can be a CEO, can be a founder, can be a like a DevRel, right? And these kind of people too. So I'm curious, like what your plans are to actually go out and try to onboard some of these people. Is it hackathons? Is it colleges? Is it like grant? Like how does one go and get these smart people?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you mentioned the whole like what's kind of our mission there, like in terms of like democratizing this stuff for like everyday developers. I mean, just a quick note on that. Yeah, we have everybody in Web3 screaming like, hey, like how do we onboard the next 1 billion users? And just like our perspective on that is like, empower the first 1 million developers and they'll build the 10x better apps that 1 billion people want to actually use, right? Like that's just how it works. It's like that type of, if you go from whatever 20,000 or developers in Web3 today, which is, I'm pretty sure it was like 22K in the latest like Electric Capital report, and you go to 1 million developers, man, the creative like energy in this thing, like the imagination just kind of like compounds like crazy, and then we will get those killer apps. Your question about finding or like kind of actually going about enabling like all these developers, I think you kind of have to meet the market where it is to some degree. Like, so we definitely want, I mean, the reason we're placing most of our emphasis right now actually on the smart contract L2 part of it is because of that. It's like, there's a lot of people who want to are already sold on like blockchains and just want kind of like to broaden the design space like on top of Ethereum or just like already in the modular like ecosystem. And I mean, that just goes hand in hand with like our development like progress and stuff. Like we're getting off the ground, and like that's kind of like the lowest hanging fruit there, and just sufficient number of problems to solve. Also, like, I think over time, as you start demonstrating, hey, like look what's possible, like look, this is useful for these types of use cases in Web 2. I think you can start to kind of bridge that gap. But honestly, I think the most organic things will end up being done that way versus going to like an enterprise and just being like, just use it, like trying to like sell them on it. Like I think it makes sense for to kind of straddle that line for a little bit and just always try to meet the market kind of like where it is. Because otherwise it's just going to kind of fall on deaf ears. And so to answer your question most directly, like right now we are focused more on kind of like the Web3 native side of things, but I do see that evolving over the next year.
And there's an important piece there, like on that line, which is like to onboard those developers. Like if I'm like, a computer science graduate, I'm coming out of college and I'm looking at like, where do I go use these skills? I'm either going to go to like, a Web 2 firm that's able to pay, a pretty significant salary, or I'm going to go like to the Web 3 startups and potentially like, get a much larger incentive. So what are like the incentives right now to like build on Fluent, use Fluent? Like, what are those incentives that we can kind of use to inspire these developers and onboard them onto Fluent?
Um,
And then if not just like influent, but just like that you've seen in crypto as well, like, like like how do crypto firms compete with Google to onboard the next, it like a token package? Is it like what it, yeah.
Yeah, I think I think we're in a bad spot if that ends up being like direct financial incentivization. Like you just start getting into this like bribe flywheel. I think that wouldn't make that wouldn't be ideal. I mean, I think the best way to do it is like is educating on them what's possible in building on a blockchain that's just simply not possible building on like an AWS. And that can really vary. I mean, I think we'll see as presumably like a kind of a bull market is kind of like, getting started, and like as more attention kind of comes back into the space and people start looking and dabbling in blockchains more and more, I think what sticks in terms of value props to like the regular Web2 developer, I still think depends, right? Like I think there are some class of people who do care about kind of like the verifiability of things, but like maybe that's more of a nice to have for a lot of use cases than the new kind of like business models that are enabled. Like maybe that's the thing that draws people in. And then the verifiable computation is like, oh, wow, that's like a nice bonus. Like I could just put this whole thing and it's like a platform that just like can't be fucked with. Like that's kind of cool, but it kind of comes after the financial components. And what I mean by financial components is like financial primitives and tools for them to use, not like, hey, come here, I'll give you like a grant or like just token. And so I think there's a huge gap in terms of developer education. I think that's like part of empowering like the Web2 natives. I think it's important that we like show that we're really clear and about what blockchains can do. And like right now, I don't think we've honestly done like a very good job of that to like the external world outside of this little bubble.
Yeah. Kind of just wrapping that loop. I think that there's a lot of work to do with university clubs. Also, I think Rollup technology is the best advertising ever. I think you're right as far as like not competing on financials. If somebody's going to want to build in crypto, then it should kind of come innately, but also at the same time, it's a competitive market out there. But if you can kind of, there's a lot more upside and a lot more fun, frankly, building here, I think, than, in a traditional environment. So I kind of want to just revisit some of your thoughts as one of the early kind of modular pioneers. You mentioned that you started modular media back in the day. Must have been in like April or May of this year or previous year, sorry. So, almost going for a year. Whereas, in June, July, we were at ECC and, I remember seeing Modular Day. It was just kind of like, damn, I'm not really sure what that is. I'm going to go to the L2 day. And now, of course, it's like, I'm like a modular penguin and like we're just talking about modular March. So, yeah, I'm just curious as to like how you've seen this thesis develop since, the beginning, I guess, since you started modular media, like what kind of got you interested and intrigued? And maybe even like, what is your individual like modular thesis outside of, what everybody else may kind of think about, if you have one? Just kind of want to pin down some of this and really get to the nuts and bolts as to why you're building what you are.
Yeah, a lot that could go in a lot of different directions. That's an interesting like route. I mean, I probably started getting interested in the modular, what's now known as the modular like thesis, before even modular media. I would probably say it was like mid 2021, honestly, just sitting in actually like Portland, Oregon, just like reading crypto Twitter, and like I think it was a bear market by then, definitely. And like COVID and all that shit. And like, so I'm sitting there and I'm reading these like posts by this guy like Polinia, or this, sorry, I don't know. It's still anonymous. I have no idea who it is, but this Polinia figure on crypto Twitter. And, I'm like, this is this is a different way of framing blockchains than I've ever like seen before. And then at the same time, I quickly discovered like the Celestia guys who like actually predated that in terms of like conceptualizing it, but I just happened to find like Fluent first. And it honestly just like it made a lot of sense. I mean, like I said, like coming from the background of like cloud computing and developer tooling, like that is how like modular is how apps get built today. Everybody in this space seems to analogize blockchains to like the iPhone or something like that. It's like, do you know how those apps actually work? Like there's a little part on your phone that you're looking at, and the back is completely modular. Like every one of the apps that you use today, actually, whether it's on like your browser, your computer, or your phone or whatever, has a backend that uses like 15 other modules under the hood. Like it happens so fast and you don't think about it and all just kind of works, but like that's what's happening. So like, it's like apps are already modular. It's just like they are. And so I think it makes sense that and that's because like people, the cloud infrastructure space learned over the course of 20 years that like the monolithic thing is good until a point, but then you kind of need, as the industry matures, it naturally gets towards like specialization and like, it's just kind of like a more flexible way to kind of like create competitive markets and then ultimately like scale performance, but also scale like the consumer like experience, because you have all these independent parties that are kind of like battling it out for each different component, and that ends up being like the best at the end of the day, like the best possible experience for like devs and users. So like, sorry, I might have lost track of your question, to be honest with you, but
No, I mean, just it's very open-ended, man, because people have different answers. I think they come along the similar route, but yeah, just very curious about just about how you're thinking about this, right? Because like even yesterday, and we're kind of getting just into the free thinker here, so feel free to just kind of expand our minds and just take this wherever. But even yesterday, it's like modular blockchains are already in the past, because Polygon just put out a post that's talking about head-weighted blockchains. They put out this little evolution diagram where you've got like the monkey, the monolithic, like the half-walking monkey human is modular, and like the all human evolution is like aggregate. So it's just like we're so early at like Polygon is over here pushing it back. So it's just craziness.
It is. Yeah, that's funny. I didn't see the human analogy one. I saw one of their other like diagrams, but it's interesting. Actually, so you can kind of look at the Fluent L2 as like these sovereign apps proliferate. I mean, the Fluent L2 turns into kind of like an aggregator layer as well, actually. Like it like that, its main responsibility, it'll have two responsibilities. The first one is to execute the smart contracts, and the second one is to aggregate proofs and like post them down to L1. So like I definitely align with I'd have to read their posts. Like I don't know, right off the bat, like hearing it as kind of like a different breed of thing, I gotta look into it. I'm not sure, but like I definitely am bullish on like aggregation layers, because I mean it just makes a lot of sense, right? It's just this like hyper scalable thing where you can have like thousands of proofs that just kind of like, instead of having to post all of them on Ethereum, you just like make a proof of all those 1,000 proofs, and all you have to do is post that one proof on Ethereum, which is like this beautiful thing. So the space is changing fast, though. I mean, the hard thing and what causes all this tension on like crypto Twitter is like right when somebody forms a mental model around something, it's broken.
Yeah, of course. Or someone tried to break it for the sake of positioning. But on that point about Fluent's design, and even further about your thesis with regards to why modular components are important. That's what they've been in Web 2. And now just makes sense to transition that here into crypto, into Web 3. Something that I asked Rushi and Prabal from Avail. Very curious to hear your answer. Like, what is your personal value accrual thesis for modular blockchains and the modular stack, right? Like, I've sent a transaction on a rollup, on a Fluent rollup. It goes through some DA layer, maybe a sequencer or shared sequencing layer, or Then it goes to the VM execution that set us back onto Ethereum, or maybe one day a different settlement layer. There's all the first different exchanges of value there. And then also like broadly, like, the different pieces of the stacks, like how do they themselves accrue value from a business perspective? How can they be valued? Like, yeah, what's your value accrual thesis for this stack? And again, it's quite broad, so feel free to take it wherever.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'd probably say I could touch on like my value accrual thesis, and then I guess the valuation of all this stuff is kind of a separate beast, and I'm not too sure. But the value accrual part, I think people are too rigid in their thinking right now of like what accrues value. Like people will be like, oh, DA can never accrue value. It's like, okay, shared sequencing is going to suck all the value away from RAS. It's like, man, I think that all of this has the opportunity to accrue value. Like if you're providing a valuable function and there are people who want it, like you can charge for that. Like I think that, and that again, just like related to Web 2. I mean, it's the same thing. Like you have Uber, for example. If you're building Uber and under the hood, you're not building your own net messaging service, like to route like the text messages and stuff like that when drivers are coming, but instead you're using Twilio. It's like an API that's sitting in the cloud under the hood, and Uber gets the payment, and they somewhere in the back end, all streamlined and out of the thought process of an end user, they pay Twilio for that service. So, and that is, if there's 14 other modules that are like underlying Uber, maybe they're using like a hosted database for some type of like big data, like parallel processing, or they're paying like Databricks for like their managed Spark or something like that. Maybe they're paying under that. Maybe they're paying like, AWS or some like Kubernetes service or like whatever. But the point is like, I think all of these things can accrue value if you're providing a valuable service. It's just simply supply and demand. And like, yeah, things get very, in the open kind of crypto environment, things get like more and more competitive. But that doesn't mean everything goes to zero. I don't think that's how it works. By the way, another thing on value accrual and kind of like value capture that I think a lot of people get wrong is thinking that everyone has to or just will choose to price based on cost. I think if there's something that we've learned from, again, Web 2 is that like software, like the best software teams that I know certainly price based on value. And I know that might sound kind of like up in the air and silly, but it's true. Like you get people, like when you pay for a software application, when you buy some SaaS thing, whether it's like Dropbox or whether it's like Slack or whatever, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who thinks you have to charge based on cost. Do you think that every additional seat in Slack or Zoom costs, like you think they're charging you based on the cost? That the cost is nothing. Like the cost is absolutely nothing for them. They can scale from 10 to 1 million seats on the back end of Zoom for near nothing. They'll do it for free for half of the seats, and then they'll start charging. They charge for value. Like that's how it goes. And like I think that the same principles can apply to like the settlement function or the DA function or any of these different pieces of it. Like, I mean, hey man, like people who say settlement will like go to zero. It's like, think about a network of 1,000 chains, and some of them have like corporations working on them. Some of them have like are more crypto native, like whatever. You have this like full. My friend Ryan Berkman's in the Ethereum ecosystem calls it the Ethereum trade network, and I kind of like that because if you think of like this, even just think of rollups, think of 1,000 rollups, and then you have one rollup that wants to like plug in. Like, what's the value? And this is where the settlement piece comes in. So it's okay. You can look at what the cost is for that rollup to post their proofs on Ethereum L1 and be like, oh, that's 5 cents a day. But okay, so you might think it goes to zero. But what's the value of being able to plug in to the economic activity of 1,000 chains in a way where where the trust assumptions are all well understood, and you'll get like an A for plays nice with others. Like basically people will those other chains will actually transact and interact with you. Like that is an incredibly valuable function. And so I just think that people are I don't know. I still think we need to evolve how we're looking at a lot of these things. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the very primitive mental model for value accrual was fat protocol thesis or fat application thesis, where like the value was either going to flow upstream or it was going to flow downstream to it was either going to flow upstream to the applications or downstream to the infrastructure that was providing like the tooling and the chains to settle those applications. That was in the monolithic era. We're now in the modular era where that is broken. And like what you're talking about is like, it doesn't just flow one way or the other. It's like this just like giant like well, and it just kind of like flies off into these a million different directions. And in every direction where a tooling is providing value, it'll be able to charge for that value, because like you're saying, it's not based on cost. Like it'll spin off value in each of those directions to the projects that are providing those functions, as long as the market finds them valuable.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. It's whether the market finds it valuable. Exactly. I mean, even take the example of like even take a Celestia, right? Like, I mean, you got people who will shit on DA value accrual and be like, all right, like how, if something can scale without issue, almost like it's a bad thing. Like, okay, realistically, if you're, even if you have, let's see, and I'll make it, I'm making this up right now. So there could be some holes in this, but think of like Celestia might be able to scale like indefinitely in theory. And I believe that it's a very scalable thing, and those guys will figure it out. They're great. But in reality, like it's going to, like if there's manual intervention that's needed every time they want to make the blocks bigger, like maybe it scales for the next like 5 years in like a pretty seamless way because crypto is just kind of getting going. But then after that, there's always a point where like the supply might be less than like the demand is increasing, and then you can charge more. Like, and then it's this balancing act. And I think that you end up in each of these, and assuming they're providing a valuable service, which they are, it's going to be very like scalable, like secure data availability. I think that I think the market kind of like finds an equilibrium for that, and like they'll be able to charge appropriate value. Like people just, I think, oversimplify a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I got asked today about the DA race to the bottom, and my answer was effectively like, I don't really understand how it's a race to the bottom, because the only thing that's happening is a better experience for users. So like, and this is kind of what Prabal was saying, where the value accrual thesis for the modular stack actually all just comes all back to the users with better apps, better UX, cheaper fees, and just a better experience overall. And the way that I answered that as well was similar. I was like, I think the DA race to the bottom, quote unquote, is just it's a race for users to pay way less fees across their favorite rollups, their favorite apps, and it's a race for sequencers to be forced to decentralize and create a more robust kind of network of verifying rollup transactions. So if that's a race to the bottom in terms of the direct value, then like we need more race to the bottoms of crypto, because that's just how we're going to get to more innovation.
I guess you can look at everything, especially in software, then as like a race to the bottom. It's just like, how long is the race? Like, I mean, if the race, I feel like every time some kind of like new functionality comes out, like people will charge for it, like it'll be more valuable or more scarce, and they'll charge more for it, whether it's like a new car feature that Elon pushes over, or like whether it's just a new like software product. And over time, yeah, it's all a race to the bottom. Like, I mean, obviously it'll get cheaper and cheaper, and then they'll offer that feature for like free, but then they'll offer something else that's more novel that pops up. And just how long's the race,
We're still early, and I think we will kind of come to a close here. Where can our community find you and Fluent? Where would you like to kind of send them off to?
Yeah, I would check out our Twitter, at Fluent XYZ. And I mean, if any of this resonated with you, if you're someone who's, trying to push the boundaries on what's possible, like on Ethereum, deploy dApps in some of these languages, like we're on private testnet, going on onboarding new partners as we speak. So we're all accessible to reach out, and we'd love to chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. A lot of insightful and a lot of parts of the brain being interconnected here.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.